You recognize his visage from the classic westerns, the person who constantly came to the rescue. But Hollywood was taken aback by Randolph Scott's personal life. His peculiar union with an heiress who resided in a different state. Another well-known actor shares his beachfront residence. When he was eventually taken by death, family members were profoundly affected by what they learned. Their lives were profoundly altered by the immense money that this humble rancher had covertly amassed. The last chuckle ultimately went to the man who hardly ever smiled on film. In Orange County, Virginia, Randolph Scott was born on January 23, 1898. But his family didn't live here. It took place while they were spending time with family. He had 5 siblings, all of whom were born in Charlotte, North Carolina. Except for him, no one else was. Although his father, George Grant Scott, was a textile engineer, he was also North Carolina's first certified public accountant. He was therefore a pioneer. In North Carolina, his mother Lucille was from a well-to-do and well-respected family. Randolph was born with both intelligence and wealth. His family held a prominent position in Southern culture and had Scottish ancestry. This provided him with a significant advantage in life. He was raised in Charlotte in a large, tasteful house that is still there. They took up residence in a stately home created by renowned architect Louis Asbury. Randolph was familiar with that type of life. Private schools, friends with connections, and the serene assurance of someone who has never had to worry about money. In Virginia, he attended Woodbury Forest School. It was more than a school. It was a place where wealthy families' sons rose to prominence in the South. That school helped to mold him. It gave him confidence, poise, and the conviction that he could accomplish anything. In addition to being a well-groomed young guy, Randolph was also athletic. He played baseball and football. He raced horses and was a competitive swimmer. These were more than pastimes. They were expensive and serious sports. At Georgia Tech, he was a football player who aspired to be an All-American. However, a serious back injury put a stop to that hope. Following his father's lead, he subsequently moved to the University of North Carolina to pursue a degree in textile engineering. Strangely, he later became ideal for Western movies because of the same sports, particularly riding. There was no need for him to pretend he could mount a horse. He could already do it. He had an effortless on-screen persona as a result. Randolph was influenced by traditional Southern ideals as well. He participated in plays put on by the Confederacy's United Daughters. These were not your typical plays. Southern pride was celebrated, and has many themes including sacrifice, loss, and honor. His gentle aristocratic Southern accent, which he established via those roles, contributed to his on-screen persona. His upbringing instilled in him the values of stoicism, pride, and propriety. In his later pictures, viewers saw just that kind of man. In addition to being helpful, his family's wealth completely altered his course. During the First World War, Randolph had a safety net when many boys from the South were having trouble finding work. When he returned from the war, he didn't have to rush. His father was so well connected that he was able to get him an introduction letter to Howard Hughes. In 1928, Randolph utilized the letter to get into Hollywood. It was not necessary for him to begin at the bottom. He came with strong buddies, beautiful appearance, and confidence. Few things could compare to that combo. Randolph was only 19 years old in April 1917 when the United States entered World War I. That July, instead of remaining at home, he joined the National Guard. He didn't wait. Most guys who joined the war effort were older. He received a promotion to corporal by October. He was promoted to sergeant by February 1918. Randolph's desire to serve overrode his father's attempts to get him into West Point. His discipline was demonstrated by that decision, which also reflected the courageous roles he would perform in subsequent movies. He was a frontline soldier in France. He was a member of the 2nd Trench Mortar Battalion, a 2-man unit. He had a risky job. When attacked by the enemy, he directed artillery fire from tiny shelters. Before each expedition, he held his dog tags and read pocket testaments with his buddy. He never discussed his observations there in public. He did precise work. He issued updates to ensure the artillery was aimed appropriately using hand-calculated math. Men may be killed if he made a mistake. Pressure like that shaped him and contributed to the quiet, grizzled strength that many observed in his parts. He also has practical skills that Hollywood was unable to replicate due to his military training. He acquired the skill of riding a horse over difficult terrain. He practiced with bayonets and guns. The props weren't these, they were tools for survival. Thus it felt authentic when Randolph portrayed soldiers and cowboys later on, since he wasn't just being heroic. He'd experienced it. Randolph did not return home immediately after the war ended in November 1918. He attended the Saumur Artillery Officer Candidate School while he was still in France. As of May 1919, he was a second lieutenant. Upon his eventual return to the United States, he enrolled in Georgia Tech in order to pursue a new goal, becoming a top football player. He returned to athletics and joined a fraternity. But his old injury returned. That dream also came to an end. In order to pursue engineering, he relocated once more, this time to the University of North Carolina. That was short-lived. There was no comparison to the thrill of the football field or the battlefield in the classroom. Leaving college, he started working for his father's textile company. He worked hard in that firm. He worked as an accountant, auditor, and office manager. He was accountable and focused. He was not excited by that existence, though. He took a chance in 1927 since it wasn't enough. He chose something completely unpredictable over a stable career. Something unexpected happened in 1929. While I was performing at the Los Angeles Country Club, Howard Hughes was his partner. Yes, the wealthy and eccentric filmmaker and pilot, Howard Hughes. Scott was unaware that everything will alter after this round of golf. Scott's height, superb looks, and southern charm caught Hughes's attention. Guys like him were needed in Hollywood. He received a brief, uncredited role in The Far Call from Hughes. By the end of the game, it was only a small portion of a film. Nothing more. It was a beginning, though. Had Scott not played golf that day, he might never have entered the movie industry. Once Scott had that fortuitous break, he learned that appearances were insufficient. He needed to be skilled. He thus signed up for classes at the Pasadena Community Playhouse. Future stars Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman trained at the best acting school on the West Coast. Scott did a lot of work. He studied theatrical acting, dancing, and voice. The renowned filmmaker Cecil B. DeMille visited to see a play in 1931. Scott was there, and was pleased. He informed someone that the young man have a talent that Hollywood cannot impart. For Scott, that moment created opportunities. No longer was he only a fortunate golfer, he was turning into an actual actor. In the same year, a strange incident occurred behind the scenes of the Western movie The Virginian. Due to his Virginia accent, celebrity Gary Cooper needed assistance. Who better than a true Virginian to instruct him? Scott took over as Cooper's coach. He wasn't the main character. He didn't even receive credit. However, he gave Cooper a more genuine tone, and critics took notice. While Scott remained in the background, Cooper became a bigger star because to the movie. Nevertheless, it strengthened their bond, and demonstrated Scott's genuine professionalism and generosity. Things became more active in 1932. Scott and Paramount Pictures reached a deal that was significant at the time. In his first big movie, Hot Saturday, he co-starred with a teenage Cary Grant and Nancy Carroll. The film caused a stir with its audacious plot, but there was more going on behind the scenes. Grant and Scott grew close to one another. For more than 10 years they even shared a beach house in Malibu. People wrote about them in periodicals, conjectured and gossiped. The reality, however, was straightforward. Uncommon in Hollywood, they shared a strong, enduring friendship. Scott continued to expand his roles during this period. He wasn't merely in the background anymore. His good looks and southern charm certainly helped. His composed, self-assured demeanor appealed to audiences, and he stood 6 feet 2 inches tall. He began to land larger parts by 1934. Whether he was playing romantic rivals or devoted pals, he always had a distinct presence on screen. The first marriage of Randolph Scott appeared to be ideal. On March 23, 1936, Marion DuPont Somerville became his wife. She was a rich heiress, and the granddaughter of the DuPont chemical empire's founder. He was 38 years old. She was 41. She ruled the horse racing world like a queen. He was making quick progress in Hollywood. Because their wedding was so intimate, it wasn't publicized until months later. Their marriage felt like the next phase of a long friendship, because Scott had been the best man at Marion's first wedding. Behind the glamour, however, something wasn't quite right. President James Madison once resided at Marion's 55-room Montpelier house in Virginia. Scott was always working in Los Angeles. On her basement, she constructed a gym for him, but because he was 6 feet 4 inches tall, they had to dig a pit on the floor so he could stand up straight while working out. Seldom were they spotted together. Hollywood was not Marion's cup of tea. Battleship, her horse, became the first American-bred winner of England's Grand National Steeplechase in 1938, making history. The party in New York was out of her reach. She was replaced by Scott. They divorced in 1939, after a 3-year long-distance union. There are only 2 lives going in opposite directions, no disputes or scandals. Marion continued to go under the Scott name until her death in 1983, although they never had children, a silent token of admiration that remained constant. Scott moved in with Cary Grant. In 1935, a year before that marriage dissolved, their home was large, 5,530 square feet, and stunning in Malibu. It was known as Bachelor Hall. They were attractive, wealthy, and youthful. They were frequently pictured relaxing on the beach or playing golf. They even had pictures staged of them working out together. It was too much for the tabloids. They made Hedda Hopper, a gossip journalist, laugh. While Grant mailed the invoices, Scott paid them, as actress Carole Lombard hinted. People spoke because they were so close, especially because Grant briefly married and then moved back in with Scott following his divorce. They shared a home for 12 years. According to some, they were simply best buddies. There was more, others whispered. For sure we will never know. However, in 1944, they married ladies and dissolved their communal living arrangement because of pressure from studios. Nevertheless, their friendship lasted a lifetime. Such ties were uncommon in Hollywood. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, Scott's work extended outside westerns. Everything had him in it. He co-starred with Mae West in a comedy, and Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers in a musical in 1936. In The Last of the Mohicans, he portrayed Hawkeye. Leslie Howard won the part of Ashley Wilkes in Gone with the Wind, despite his best efforts. He starred in films such as Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, Roberta, and Pittsburgh. His ability to transition between genres, charming one minute, intense the next, was praised by critics. Not yet, he was just another cowboy. That time molded him. They assisted him in establishing his fan base and determining his range. By the early 1940s, he had stopped flitting between genres. He adopted a Western lifestyle and wore the cowboy hat as if it were a natural fit. Directors adored him. Scott is the only gentleman I've encountered in my line of work, according to Michael Curtis. With so many divas in the industry, that meant something. Before offering him major roles, Cecil B. DeMille sent him to train at the Pasadena Playhouse in the early years. In addition to learning and listening, he never caused trouble. Greats like Henry King, Jesse James, and George B. Seitz, the last of the Mohicans, were among his colleagues. They were appreciative of his discipline. He was consistently prepared, professional, and on time. In the background, he was a true Southern gentleman. 2 parts, transformed everything. In 1936, The Last of the Mohicans demonstrated his ability to direct an action movie. It was action-packed, quick and tight in just 92 minutes. Scott's Hawkeye was a kind-hearted hero. Jesse James followed in 1939. Together with Tyrone Power and Henry Fonda, Scott portrayed Will Wright. In both the United States and Canada, the movie earned over $2.3 million. That year, only Gone with the Wind and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington performed better. A horse-related scene created such a controversy that Hollywood was forced to protect animals on set. That was the size of the movie. Scott was eager to serve when America joined World War II. His attempt to enlist in the Marines was denied because of a back problem. He did not, however, simply watch it happen. Alongside comic Joe Dorita, He performed for troops on military bases. He cultivated food on his own property for the government. With combat films like To the Shores of Tripoli, Bombardier Corvette K-225, and Gung Ho, he kept people's spirits up on screen. These were not merely amusing movies, they were encouraging. Scott came to represent the imagined and actual power of the United States. He and Patricia Stillman were married in 1944. He died in 1987, after more than 40 years of marriage. Christopher and Sandra, two of their adopted children. In contrast to other Hollywood spouses, Scott's family life remained stable and quiet. It brought him a calm that many stars could never find. He was a businessman as well. He founded Ronan Productions in the late 1940s with producer Harry Joe Brown. It was a combination of their names, Brown and Randolph. Most actors were powerless back then. All calls came from the studios. With Ronan, however, Scott chose his own projects, primarily westerns. He was given more creative control and paid more. His last cinematic years were affected by this decision. In 1946, the film Bad Man's Territory was released. Mark Rowley, portrayed by Scott, was a police officer who dealt with criminals such as Jesse James and the Dalton Gang. The film's profit was $557,000. That was a lot of money. It was adored by audiences. Scott was a surefire box office hit and received 2 sequels. Although Randolph Scott didn't instantly become a Hollywood icon, something amazing happened between 1950 and 1953. He entered the top 10 list of male celebrities in America and remained there for 4 years in a row. That wasn't common for actors in general, but it was particularly uncommon for those in westerns, which weren't often the most popular genre at the box office. It was even more astonishing that Scott, who was already in his 50s, made a lot of money from his films. By 1950, he was making $100,000 for each movie, which is equivalent to $1.3 million today. From the countryside to the cities, families waited in line to witness his modest yet effective kind of justice. Tough cowboys, wide-eyed children, and everyone in between were among his admirers. He rose above the status of star. He became a representation. There was more to that increase than just numbers. The stories he told, and the manner in which he told them were the focus. He portrayed Bat Mastern in 1947's Trail Street, a tough cop sent to straighten up a crazy Kansas town. It was more than just an action-packed film. It had vitality and vigor, and it made a healthy $360,000 profit. After killing his best friend that year, Scott was a damaged man, attempting to move behind his violent history in Gunfighters. He displayed silent, intense, and genuine anguish. With The Walking Hills, a grimy, dusty treasure quest in the desert, he went even farther by 1949. In the midst of this film's blend of Western gritty and noir intrigue, Scott stood tall, composed, and incredibly human. His appearance evolved with the depth of his roles. Scott had a different visage by his late 40s. Because it was shot on location, it was more difficult, sharper, and tainted by the sun and wind. However, rather of concealing his age, he embraced it. He seemed more genuine because of his icy gaze and leathery skin. This man, you thought, had seen hard things. Even without words, his visage conveyed stories. Scott's worn appearance made him stick out even more because it brought to mind historical legends like William S. Hart. He didn't require big situations or gaudy phrases. He had the power to convey an entire scene with a single look. Then his career's most crucial phase began. Together, Scott and Boter produced 7 westerns between 1956 and 1960. These weren't epics with large budgets, lean, taut, and full of meaning. They were. Each one revealed a different side of the Western hero, revealing his loneliness, his regrets, and his suffering. Comanche Station, Westbound, Ride Lonesome, Buchanan Rides Alone, The Tall T, 7 Men From Now, and Decision at Sundown are now referred to as the Renon cycle. By removing the outdated cliches, they presented the Western as a dangerous, lonely world, where doing the right thing comes at a price. Scott's character in 7 Men From Now was plagued with guilt. He had lost his wife in a robbery. Because he was proud and turned down less important employment, he blamed himself, forcing her to accept the position that ultimately resulted in her death. He was driven by every man he encountered, and every stride he took, by that agony. In the role of his opponent, Lee Marvin portrayed the darker aspects of Scott's own personality as a charming killer. They had a personal conflict in addition to a physical one. The film did not conclude with a triumph. Knowing that retaliation couldn't offer peace, the man was still bearing his burden at the end. After a year, the tall T sank even farther. In one scenario, Scott's character, Pat Brennan, attempted to trade candy with a bull, and that brief instant, in some way, spoke it all. He was not a savage. He was a man who valued wisdom and patience over brute force. He was placed in a hostage scenario with vicious murderers and an innocent woman in the story. But the guns weren't the only threat. The decisions were the problem. Could he save her? Can he trust his adversaries? Might he leave? Every choice was painful, and the stress persisted. As a result, the movie has been added to the National Film Registry. Scott played one of his most agonizing parts in Ride Lonesome by 1959. Ben Brigade was the name of the bounty hunter he portrayed, although he wasn't interested in the prize. He desired his own form of justice. His wife had been murdered and abducted years earlier. There was still the man who had done it. Brigade thus used the killer's brother as bait, rather than for financial gain. The scene at the end where he destroys the tree from which his wife was hanged says it all. That fire wasn't only a chase's conclusion. The healing process began. Powerful, silent and unforgettable. Then Comanche Station appeared. This was Scott's final Western before he retired in 1960. The parting was ideal. Jefferson Cody, a character he portrayed, had been looking for his wife, who had been abducted by the Comanches, for 10 years. Perhaps, just perhaps, he might find her while saving another woman. However, she was not the one. He took her home nonetheless, as he had promised, safeguarding her from perilous men in the process. He rode out by himself after it was over, still looking and yet holding out hope. Scott's last message was that, sometimes heroes fail. Occasionally, they simply continue. Ride the High Country, released in 1962, was merely another low-budget Western. At the time, Sam Peckinpah, the filmmaker, was not well known. He had a lot of ideas that the studio didn't like, was young, and was belligerent. The production was plagued by problems from the start. Although MGM had intended to film at the picturesque Mammoth Lakes, the weather was not cooperative. In order to relocate everything to Bronson Canyon in Los Angeles, hundreds of miles away, the studio issued an order. That shift went horribly wrong. Peckinpah, who was upset over the choice, made sure the staff and actors remained intoxicated. For the 6-hour bus ride back to Los Angeles, the mayhem continued. The head of MGM, Joseph Vogel, slept out after seeing an early edit of the movie. Upon awakening, he referred to it as the worst film he had ever watched. The movie didn't even get a fair shot from MGM. It was pushed onto the lower portion of double features. It was a huge failure in the United States. However, Europe witnessed a shift. In the international market, Ride the High Country became one of MGM's most successful films, and the movie's notoriety started to rise gradually. It was chosen for the National Film Registry's preservation in 1992. What was once a problematic production became a classic. Randolph Scott was the central figure in all of this. Gil Westrom was his role, an elderly former lawyer who is having difficulty adapting to the modern world. The story is set in 1905, when the Old West was rapidly disappearing. Scott's face was ideal for the part since it was worn, serious, and honest. His morals were conflicted between honor and greed, devotion and wealth. Joel McCrea and Scott were both facing their own dusk behind the camera. The picture had a subtle power because they were real-life legends portraying guys out of time. It was further enhanced by the cinematography. Throughout the entire film, Lucien Ballard's delicate autumnal color images created a sense of farewell to the classic Hollywood Western itself, not simply the frontier. This was not your typical Western. It had a soul, Additionally, Scott's performance was among his most emotional, perhaps the most sentimental, perhaps the greatest. So did Scott. He permanently left acting after the movie. He had no intention of continuing to play dwindling parts or fade into obscurity. Gil Westrom had been the conduit for his words. It was everything in that one performance: remorse, pride, doubt, and redemption. He could never top it, Scott told his friends. Thus he made no attempt. He departed as he saw fit. Scott, however, was not only a clever actor, it made him even smarter. He continued to be active after retiring in 1962. His attention was on business, and he was better than most Hollywood players at that game. He had amassed a fortune of $100 million by the middle of the 1960s. That's over $280 million in today's currency. The majority of actors didn't think so. However, Scott did. He waited, bought early, and saw the numbers rise. He was not merely the owner of a few mansions. He had a large land holding, particularly in Palm Springs and San Fernando. By 1965, those properties alone were valued at more than $100 million. Palm Springs gained popularity, and San Fernando's population skyrocketed. Scott anticipated it before anyone else did, but he didn't end there. He contributed to the founding of Corona, California's Park Ridge Country Club in 1927. Afterwards, that course was transformed into Cresta Verde, a popular hangout for celebrities including Burt Lancaster, Clark Gable, and Lucille Ball. Despite Scott's passion for golf, this was also business. Today it continues to attract people, and has grown to become one of the oldest courses in the United States. Few others were able to combine his personal passion with financial success like he did. Randolph Scott's legacy extended beyond his work as a filmmaker, until he passed away in 1987. He still had about $100 million in his fortune. Even after accounting for inflation, he had outperformed most. In contrast, the estate of Cary Grant was valued at approximately $130 million in the present day. Katharine Hepburn's, in the vicinity, $30 million. Scott had numbers that were unmatched. Nevertheless, the rugged cowboy began to wane in his last years. He had trouble breathing, and had heart issues. He was hospitalized multiple times due to pneumonia. He required full-time care in 1987 due to his weakness. He passed away peacefully in his sleep at home in Beverly Hills on March 2. His age was 89. Cary Grant, his friend, had died only 2 months prior. There were just 25 family members present for Scott's funeral. It took place in Charlotte, North Carolina, close to his childhood home. Overseeing the service was Reverend Billy Graham. Scott was referred to as one of Hollywood's best talents in a telegram delivered by President Ronald Reagan.